playing these tournaments at the end of the season. So, I don't know if that meant anything, but what it started to do back there, Kenny, when they started going with all this stuff, and then COVID hit. So everybody got, it seems to me, a chance to play 6 years of college basketball. Now, I only played three, and I had a great career, 3 years as a floor leader. We weren't called point guards. We were called playmakers back in my era. And people might say, how good was it back in the late 60s? Well, I graduated in a class that had Earl the Pearl Monroe and Walt Frazier, to name a couple. Willis Reed was a couple of years before that. Bill Bradley was a senior when I was a sophomore. There are more guys in that top 50 all time. I look at the history of college basketball. I have a huge edition of his last name was Savage, and he did an incredible history of the NCAA tournament from 1939 all the way up to, I think it was 2011. I don't know if they still publish it, but you get every box score of every tournament game that was played. And there's a story about the tournament before they have all the box scores. But you can look back and see what the superstars of the pro game who played in college and find out how they did in the NCAA tournament back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, et cetera. And what I would like to be able to do someday, and maybe my grandson will want to look at it, the stats for today's players versus those. Let's say Pete Maravich played 3 varsity years at LSU. Do you think he might have come out early in today's world? Yes, sirree. But he only played 3 years. And they got guys who played 6, and maybe they redshirted medically 7 years. These guys are 26 years old. When I was 25, I was an all-pro in the league I played in, the New England Basketball Association, which went from Boston down to Southern Connecticut, where I was playing. And, I would have been a pretty good college basketball player by the time I was 25 because I was a very good pro player by that age. So you can't tell, and you cannot compare a 1990s player with a guy from 2020. There is no way that you can compare those guys, because if a guy stayed 6 years in college, he's not going to have a very long or successful NBA career. They should have asterisks and double asterisks for anybody that played more than 3 varsity years. And I say 3 because, for a good part of the 60s and 70s, only 3 years were allowed. And that's when I played. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was known as Lou Alcindor, who was a couple of years younger than me. That was another guy that I would put in everything that he ever played in. He only played 3 varsity years at UCLA. And today, he'd play 1 year, and he would be calling the owner of his team partner, because he would have enough money in his pocket to own an NBA team. Where today's guys have the benefit of all the blood, sweat, and tears of that era that was made back in the 50s and 60s. When Wilt Chamberlain came into the NBA, he came off, great teams at Kansas. Not an NCAA tournament champion, but great teams at Kansas, and where everybody was sagging in his lap. And when he went to the pros after 1 year of playing for the Harlem Globetrotters, where they lured him away from the NBA with a $100,000 contract, which I'm sure they made up with the crowds they used to draw back then. He would play a half of serious basketball, and then they would clown around and put on their show and it would be on television. He learned how to handle the ball during that era. But he was, he was a product of the 1950s. But he'd be a star in this generation as well as, any other big man who's a star today. Will could dribble. He could dribble. He had a great fadeaway jump shot. I don't know who taught him that, but he could really shoot it and kiss it off the backboard. The only thing he couldn't do was become a great foul shooter. And that's because, he admitted it in one of the books he wrote afterwards. He didn't put in the time it took to be a great foul shooter.
Coach, you look at this season now, UConn won back-to-back national titles for the first time since the Florida Gators in 06, 07. What do you think the likeness is, or the likeliness is now that they can win 3 in a row?
I don't know. I'm not an odds maker, but I'd give a 10% chance because they lost 4 starters. I mean, 4 starters. Newton, their point guard, who really made that team go. He was a great college point guard by the time Danny Hurley finished with him. That was 2 years at UConn. He was a scorer when he was in college down in El Paso, or he was from El Paso, and his first years in college, he wasn't known as a point guard. He went to East Carolina, I believe.
Yeah.
And everybody's saying, who's this guy, Newton, coming to UConn? How in the world is he going to play? Well, UConn has 3 or 4 guys like that right now that Danny Hurley's going to try to find out before the Big East schedule starts, as much as he can about these guys. I love the talent level on UConn, but there's a lot of new guys. There are a lot of, last year they had Cam Spencer and Newton in the backcourt. Neither one of them turned the ball over. Both were great 3-point shooters. The only returning starter is Alex Carabin. They lost their big guy, who was a lottery pick this year. They lost one other player. I can't tell, the guard from New Jersey, who everybody was talking about as being a one-and-done player. And a lot of people wondered why, because he only averaged 10 or 12 a game last year. And right now, because he's not playing for UConn, I don't have his name at the tip of my tongue. But, he was a nice player, but probably the 3rd or 4th best player on that team. But he's in the NBA and playing for somebody. So they lost 4 NBA-level players. But at UConn, it's reload. Don't ever say the word rebuild. A lot of people weren't around watching college basketball when I played. But UConn back then dominated the Yankee Conference. Rhode Island and Massachusetts were very good teams during that era. I think UConn won 7 out of 8 championships from 1964 to the end of the 60s. They were the dominant team in New England, or the second best team in New England. And people wouldn't know much about that unless they studied it, or they're history buffs in college basketball. Providence spent a good part of 1967, which was my senior year, as the #1 team in America. St. Joseph's in my sophomore year was #1 or 2 all the way up through the tournament. They got upset by Princeton, and people would say, Princeton? Yeah. Princeton had Bill Bradley, Chris Tomford, and one other NBA player, and a guy named Butch Van Bredikoff was their coach. That was long before Pete Carrill. Butch was famous for his fast break and playing up tempo. Bill Bradley scored 55 points in a Final Four consolation game. People would wonder, what in the world's a consolation game? But one of the best games every year at the Final Fours was between the 2 teams that were left. after the first round on Saturday. The two losing teams would have to come back Monday and play in the first game of a doubleheader. Well, Princeton took that pretty seriously, I guess, if Bill Bradley scored 55 points. But the 60s were loaded with great players and great talent. And for that era, it was coming on with coaches. There was still a lot of older coaches from the 50s and even 1940s that were hanging on, but their style of play wasn't getting it done. And everybody started changing coaches. That became an era in the 60s where coaches, they didn't win at a good basketball school. They didn't last very long.
Conferences across the country now, the SEC may be the deepest conference in the country. And of course, your Longhorns there now with Rodney Terry and Frank Haith, two of my buddies. They're going to make a play in there. They just did a good job winning the Barclays Classic here this weekend.
I like my old Longhorns, and can't wait to get down to Austin to see them live. When I'm there, I get to go to practices and see them. But I was very impressed with how they played this past weekend. And they're a team like in Vegas, you shoot the dice or somebody does. They're on the come line now. They're a team that could be really, really tough in conference play. They lost a lot from last year's team. I think 3 starters, maybe 4, but they have some very talented players. Trey Johnson is for real. He's going to be a great player at the next level. Rodney Terry, one of the down things about Trey Johnson, he's only going to have him for 1 year. And watching them play, somebody's got to tell Trey that he doesn't need to break the shooting record. He needs to break scoring records. He's been firing up about 20 shots a game, but there isn't a shot that he's taken that he can't hit. It's just whatever happens when he and Trayvon Mark learn to play together with one basketball. And the center, the kid who transferred from Virginia, who was not healthy at all last year, he looks like he is healthy and could be a real contributing factor. A 6'11" guy that's very mobile, very agile kid who can score. The only question mark right now is who is going to become the point guard on this team. They've got transfers, kids, 5th and 6th year players filling those roles, which I think was a great recruiting move. Because last year we didn't have a point guard. Max Abesmith, Max was a great scorer, and they were trying to make a point guard out of him. That's the old square peg in a round hole for a lot of kids in their first year adjusting to that new position. But Max was a great scorer, and he did a pretty good job as point guard. But when the game was on the line, everybody in the building knew that Rodney Terry was going to try to get the ball in Max's hands because he was not only their best point guard, he was their best scoring guard, their best foul shooting guard. But it was kind of a downer after the Elite 8 run, but I kind of expected a rebuilding year. But fans in Austin, they're spoiled now. I think we ruined that forever during my 10 years there. It wasn't just get to the tournament anymore. It was, at least the Sweet 16 this year is projected for Texas basketball. And I'm like, whoa, I'll be lucky if we get in the top 4 of the Southwest Conference. Coaches are the last ones to predict success for their own team. Don't ever believe a coach who says, we're really down. We're going to rebuild this year. At a lot of schools, you can't even say those words.
We got to think Houston Cougars when we start thinking about a national championship. They had an unbelievable game the first Saturday, I think, of the season against Auburn. where they did lose 74-69, but that game was like the first matchup for both of them against each other. And it was like Baylor St. John's the other night. It was a Final Four-esque game.
Yeah, you never know who's going to be in what bracket, how they're going to seed the teams. But Auburn and Houston, Marquette and UConn stand out to me as teams that have a good shot at getting, to a Final Four, provided they're on opposite sides of the bracket. If UConn played Auburn or Houston right now, I don't think it would be much of a game. But UConn, Danny Hurley, their teams get better and better and better every year. I saw him in person do that at Rhode Island, and he's done it at UConn. Don't project what you're seeing now from a Danny Hurley team and what you're going to see in March. He fiddles and diddles and uses different combos and matchups. Yeah, he wants to win every game and lose once in a while. He doesn't want to lose. No coach ever wanted to lose. But Danny is the kind of guy who will learn about his team in the film room after losses. When you win, and win all year long, the pressure mounts. It gets harder and harder to do it in March. So, I like those four teams right now. I'm sure I'll add to the list. Everybody's going Duke, Duke, Duke. Look, Mike Krzyzewski is no longer the head coach.
Exactly.
Shire's done a nice job as a young coach. I see the differences between Mike Krzyzewski's teams and his. And there's one word that could describe it: toughness. Mike Krzyzewski's teams were always tougher than nails, like he was. He started out at Army. And as I said before, when you hit 70, sissies don't survive. If you ever coached at Army and had to get out and get to a good job to win and extend your career, Mike Krzyzewski did it. Bob Knight did it. And those were pretty fair coaches throughout their careers because of what they went through and having to win at a school like West Point. It's a tough, tough place. But Bobby Knight was there and went to 6 NITs before he was offered a school like Indiana, before that job came calling him. And the same thing with Mike Krzyzewski. As a matter of fact, both of them were called after they had a losing season at West Point. I think Mike won 9 and it lost around 19 that year. And then that spring, he got the Duke job. Bobby Knight, his last year, it was his 7th straight opportunity to get in the NIT, and they fell short. But look what he did at Indiana. Even his job at Texas Tech, where they hadn't been anything in a long, long time, he set the stage there for Chris Beard and his assistants and staff. So it's too early to judge teams.
Oh, yeah.
But, with this NIL, there are teams out there, and we can talk a little bit about the NIL if you want to.
Sure.
I think between NIL and advertising, the NCAA has forgotten all their old rules, thrown them out, and now the next thing you're going to see is coaches with advertising on their backs, officials that are sponsored by fast food joints, Jiffy Lube, and other products all over their officiating uniforms. How do I know that? I took a team to Australia back in 1990, I think it was 96, in the summer of 96, before we went back to the Sweet 16 in 97 with Reggie Freeman was our star. Anyway, the officials had advertising on them. Every part of the scoreboard except the square had advertising on it. The floor was covered with advertising. The 3-point lanes were covered with advertising. you're going to see that next in college basketball.
Sure.
And I don't know that for sure, but when I see something in some other part of the world, and I ask, why do you have to use all that advertising? It's simple. It's called money. It's all about money. And college sports now, it's almost a misnomer to call it college sports. I call it Class C level. You got the G League. Well, this is the C level because, and that's the next step, Ken, is you want to have transparency no matter what you're doing in sports, politics, whatever. Everybody's demanding it now. It's going to be interesting when ESPN starts talking about it. Fox has already started talking about NIL stuff during their telecasts and in their interviews and the shows during the week. It's like, well, they got this player because they have a very high NIL budget. Well, there are schools in Division I trying to go to the NCAA tournament that don't even have an NIL. They don't have one player who's making any money outside of this scholarship because they don't have the alumni who support the programs by giving the university money. And I don't want to hear they can't recruit using NIL.
Yeah.
That's a lot of baloney. If a coach has something that he can offer a player that's not illegal, they can do it. I don't care what rules are put down in the NCAA. And I don't have any idea about the new rules that take care of college basketball.
Yeah, that's why there should have been a ceiling and a basement. And nobody can get over the ceiling because we got to keep the sport where it is. Because I think one of the most exciting things, and we've already seen this in November, is when we get, a mid-major team or a one-bid league team knocking off the higher, more well-known teams with an upset.
Yeah, and everybody's saying this is the upset of the month. How do they know?
Yeah.
Maybe this St. Joe's team that went all the way to the
they look nice.
Yeah, they've got big guys. They've got outstanding guards.
Billy's an excellent coach,
and yeah, he does an excellent job. He took over a program that didn't have any talent in it. St. Joe's was patient with his development. He knew what he was doing. He had a plan and how to do it. And I'm sure they don't have much in the NIL category, if anything.
Yeah.
Or if they are, Billy's using it very wisely because they were very impressive in their 2 games that I saw in their tournament. And who was it they just played yesterday? They lost.
By 1, yeah.
Yeah, I forgot who it was that beat them. I saw about 11 games yesterday.
Yeah, me too.
But they were not supposed to be in the game.
Yeah.
It was little St. Joseph's, not even projected to be in the top 5 in the Atlantic 10 right now. Mm-hmm. And they look like they could play in almost any conference in the country. And being a Philadelphia school in the Atlantic 10, they're going to be looked at just like Temple was back in the John Chaney era, when they were number 1 in the country for something like 50 out of 52 weeks of the 2 years combined in John Chaney's run during it was 87 and 88, I believe, when he had those great teams at Temple. And John Chaney played everybody. Mm-hmm. He didn't duck anybody. There was nobody on their schedule that you say, well, let me look that one up. Let me Google that name. Mm-hmm. You knew everybody that John Chaney was teaming it up against.
The Hawks lost by 1 to Texas Tech and by 9 to Texas.
And that wasn't a 9-point loss to Texas.
Yeah.
That was a 1-possession game until the final 2 minutes. And St. Joe's lost one of their big kids, and They had an opportunity to score on a layup. The kid tried to dunk it, and it missed, and Texas got a fast break out of it. So, they're very capable of playing with Texas, who I think is going to be one of the best teams in the SEC, provided that Trey Johnson stays healthy and has the kind of freshman year I believe he's going to have.
They're going to be right in the hunt there, I think, too, with Auburn and Tennessee. Florida's going to be really good again. Also Alabama, although Alabama defensively, I think people can go at them defensively and be successful.
Yeah, Alabama has never excelled in defense
No.
with NATO's coaching. He believes in getting it up and down and shooting threes. Not that they don't spend time on it, but it hasn't reached the floor level consistently for his team. And I thought this year you're going to see more of it. So far, not so much. It's early, but I hate to keep doing this, but back in my coaching era, we couldn't even watch them work out until October 15th.
Yeah.
Now they practice year round. They have maybe 3 or 4 weeks off during the summer months. And they have a combination of 65 days or something before they open up official practice in October. So they practice year round now.
Yeah.
Guys should all be good foul shooters. The shooting should be excellent if coaches know what to work on. It's time to work on skill sets of players and competitive three-point shooting. That's something that wins basketball games. A lot of people say, well, the second half will be turned around because of paint touches.
Yeah.
That's in my reasoning. As soon as they put that three-point shot in, it was too easy back in '87 when it came in for the first time in the Atlantic 10. They had already experimented with it before I was coaching there. Back the ACC and the Atlantic 10 were playing when NC State went all the way in 1983. The Atlantic Coast Conference was already playing with a three-point line, which gave them an edge in their outside shooting, even though the NCAA tournament was played without the three-point line. Jim Valvano's Wolfpack had a great outside shooting team, which became a major weapon for them as the year went on. And even though they didn't get 3 for it, because they played their entire ACC schedule, the three-point line was inside the top of the key. It was like a 19-foot jump shot back then. That's what they passed for rules in the ACC all the way back in '83. It wasn't until '86, '87 before most conferences went with the three-point line. So that was 4 years before the real line went into the tournament that Jim Valvano's Wolfpack went all the way through, back when Phi Slamma Jamma, Guy V. Lewis's best teams were making a habit out of getting to the Final Four, just like Kelvin Sampson's Houston team, which is definitely a team to watch. His teams always seem to get better, but they've been bitten by the injury bug. Last year it was Jamal Shed that got hurt.
They may have won the tournament, but they would have won that game over Duke if he hadn't gotten hurt by double digits.
They were the only team that was physically tough enough and balanced enough to give UConn a really good run.
Yeah.
But they didn't make it to the Final Four.
Coach
Hopefully this year it'll happen for Kelvin.
Coach Tom Penders, ladies and gentlemen, love talking hoops with him. He's one of the legendary coaches, one of the great coaches. And if you didn't see his teams play, you should go to YouTube, find some video, and watch these guys run at fast break. He was an excellent teacher, and it's all the mad respect I can have for you, Coach.
Kenny, it's always a pleasure catching up with you, and let's do it again in February.
Most definitely. Yeah, we'll do it again in February and we'll see where everybody is, gone to then.
All right. Well, be safe out there with all your travels.